Hello and welcome. We hope that you are well, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on Blue Thunder Mining Corporation. My name is Jacob Willoughby, and I'm a Vice President of Research and an Analyst at Red Cloud Securities Incorporated. Joining me remotely today are Rob Sinnott, President and CEO, and Oren Bernowski, CFO of Blue Thunder Mining. As always, we'll begin today's webinar with a presentation of the company by Rob and Oren, followed by a question and answer period. As a reminder, you can type in your questions at any time. We'll try and get through as many as we can in the time allotted. But before we begin, I'd like to note that there may be some forward-looking statements made in this webinar, and I would direct listeners to the cautionary notes on page 2 of Blue Thunder's corporate presentation located on their website. For Red Cloud Securities Incorporated, I would highlight that this webinar is for information purposes only and should not be considered a solicitation to purchase or sell securities or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. Also, we note that this webinar does not take into account the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigations and seek their own professional advice before investment. Company-specific disclosures for Red Cloud are the following. In the last 12 months preceding the date of issuance of this research report or recommendation, Red Cloud Securities Incorporated has performed investment banking services and been retained under a service or advisory agreement by the issuer. And of course, as most of you know well, Red Cloud is a major shareholder of Blue Thunder Mining. And now I'm very happy to introduce to you Rob Sinnott, President and CEO, and Oren Bernowski, CFO of Blue Thunder Mining.
Great. Thanks so much, Jacob, and thanks for everyone joining in today. And we'll take a bit of time here to go through our current corporate presentation. And as Jacob said, happy to answer any questions at the end. Just highlight this one more time. We are making forward-looking statements in our presentation today, so please download our presentation and read these over. So let's start with some investment highlights here. Blue Thunder, fairly new company. We went public just earlier this year. We've accumulated a very large land package in the Chibougamau mining camp, which has a large emerging gold portion to it, which is a pretty exciting place to be. We're at the crossroads of several major regional structures, and these are all associated with recent discoveries in the area and historical producers and resources in the area, including the Nelligan resource, 3.2 million ounces, and Monster Lake, just under 500,000 ounces. And these are both majority held or held 100% by IAMGOLD. We're also in Quebec, and that's one of the best jurisdictions you could possibly imagine. Fantastic place, amazing jurisdiction to work in. So some quick highlights here. We've recently released some trenches that we did at our Fancamp property, coming up with some pretty interesting results at surface, including 12.3 grams over 3 meters, and that included a high grade of tail. About that in a minute. We've completed 14 core holes at Fancamp. We've released the initial results on hole 1 and 2, and we hope to be able to release additional results here fairly soon. We are at the mercy of labs right now, and assays are coming in very, very slowly. That was highlighted by a 1 meter interval of 4.73 grams per ton in hole number 2. We've also actively been working on gridding and IP resistivities on our Muus property, and that is completed. And we've recently mobilized a rig to our Muus property to test some of these high priority targets. So I'm just going to pass.
Shares outstanding and around 98 million fully diluted, including options and warrants. Our share price is traded in a range of between 9 and 12 cents over the past month or so, and as of yesterday, we had a market cap just over $7 million. So despite our despite our early stage that we're at, we do have a fairly significant institutional shareholding in the company, and that came in largely through the most recent financing we completed this summer, raising about $2.3 million. And then, as Jacob said, Red Cloud owns about 29%, Board Management owns just over 10%, and O3 Mining 8%, and that was we purchased the Fancamp and Embry properties from them earlier this year, and they've come on as shareholders. Our last reported cash figure was $2.4 million at the end of June. I mean, that figure is lower today as a result of the exploration activities that Rob will go into and discuss in a minute, but we do have a pretty healthy cash balance as we are today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rob to go into more details on the project.
Thanks, Oren. So I just want to go over sort of a high level what the Blue Thunder projects are. Our Muus project, as I said, we have 51,000 hectares in the Chibougamau area, and we find this to be a very prospective area for gold and base metal exploration. We're at the crossroads of three main deformation zones, and these are all regionally known to be associated with gold mineralization in the district. The Fancamp deformation zone, the Gershaville deformation zone, and a trend that goes from the Philibert to the Joman trend, but also crosses a significant portion of our property. And these structures all individually cross about 12 to 18 kilometers of our ground, so there's a lot of exploration work we need to do to evaluate these structures. As I mentioned earlier, nearby discoveries include the Nigan deposit. They came out with a maiden resource of 3.2 million ounces of gold, grading about a gram. That was late in October of 2019. And the Monster Lake deposit, another 100% IM gold deposit. And that's an inferred resource of 433 ounces at a much higher grade, 12.1 grams. And that's more indicative of typical Abitibi style grades, higher grade. There's been an awful lot of staking, consolidations, acquisitions in the area. It's very difficult to go in there and stake ground today without doing acquisitions. So our thesis on what we're trying to achieve, we evaluated all of this back in 2017 when the property was first being put together by our founder, Chad Williams. He discovered that a lot of ground was worked over, but a lot of it was evaluated back when gold was about $350 an ounce, and not that much work has been done on significant portions of our property since then. So there's a lot of interesting areas there that were looked at in the past, but walked away from when gold was at a lot lower trading price. The other interesting thing is there's a huge amount of cover on our property. There's a lot of soil, there's a lot of till, and maybe there's 5 or 10% outcrop exposure. I think 10% is a bit aggressive. I actually think it's less than that. And that is a challenge and an opportunity for us. Things have been walked over. However, there's an awful lot that remains to be discovered in our opinion. So just a sort of an overview of what we've achieved since we went public in February of this year. We listed on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol BLUE through an RTO. We continue to grow our land holdings up to the 51,000 hectares that we hold right now. We did an acquisition with O3 Mining to pick up the Fancamp and Embry properties. And Fancamp became our first priority exploration target, which I'll get into in a minute. We did our financing, $2.3 million raised through a private placement. We put together a Quebec-based exploration team and designed a 2-phase exploration program to advance 3 main principal target areas. So since then, we've drilled 14 drill holes. We've stripped and washed 9 trenches, both at Fancamp. We've done regional prospecting over a large portion of our ground, but we have not covered everything yet. There's an awful lot of ground to explore here yet. And we've recently completed geophysics, IP resistivity over 2 separate areas on our Muus block, and we've remobilized a rig to test some of the anomalies on these grids. So this next slide highlights where we are. So the blue claims are our land position. You can see we have a lot of ground in the area. We're just south of the historical Chibougamau mining camp. I'm going to turn my whiteboard on here. So this is the area up here, and this was historically mined. There was 3 billion pounds of copper and about 4 million ounces of gold. Below that, this is what we call the Chibougamau Gold District, and this is where we're located. And it's highlighted by the recent Nelligan discovery, 3.2 million ounces, which I mentioned earlier. And here's the other IM gold deposit, Monster Lake. But there's also a series of historical resources and old producers, including Philibert, Meston, and Joe Mann. And these all occur along a trend that goes through here, along one of our major structures, and I'll show that in a second. Let me see if I can clear this. There we go. So before we get into the details of our program, I just want to talk a little bit about the project history. The Muus property was explored in the 1950s to mostly the 1980s, but a little bit beyond that. The Fancamp property was explored over roughly the same time frame, and they did drilling up until the 1990s with a couple of holes after that, but the majority of the work was over that period. And the Nisk and Muus East blocks, let me just go back quickly here. So I'm going to turn this on for 1 sec. So this is our Muus block. This is Fancamp. This is Muus East. And this is our Nisk block. So these latter two here and here have seen very little exploration. The majority of the work that we're talking about has been on these two properties right here. So there has been historical drilling on the property. The vast majority of these 343 holes have been on the Fancamp property. Other than that, they're wide-spaced, shallow, and as I mentioned earlier, anomalous assays were generally not followed up. When I say anomalous, anything in the 1, 2, 3 gram range, really not a lot of emphasis was placed on that in the past to follow up on it. They were looking for 8, 10, 12 gram intervals. We believe that there's opportunity to find that, but by and large, this area remains fairly underexplored. So when we acquired the property in 2017, since then we've done some aeromagnetic work, 2 big surveys, one in early 2019, and then we also acquired some data later that same year that gave complete coverage over all of our claim blocks. We continue to use and evaluate that data. It's exceptionally good resolution. A lot of it is flown with a helicopter at 50-meter line spacing, giving some exceptional resolution. We've completed our regional prospecting and trenching. We're still waiting for assays to come back on all of that. We've done 14 drill holes and 9 excavator trenches, and I'll get into some details here. So this map, once again, highlights our property position. And what I'm showing here are our priority target areas. I'm going to turn this on once again. Number 1 priority area was the Fancamp property. Number 2 priority area is what we call the Gerscherville trend. So we have this large deformation zone that comes right through here, goes through the Nelligan deposit and continues on. And in the middle of our Muus block, the Gerscherville splays into 2 separate areas. This one that goes through the Philibert, Meston, and Joe Mann deposits, and another splay that comes up here as the Fancamp deformation zone and goes right through the middle of our property and continues on to the Chevrier deposit up to the northeast of us. There's numerous other lower, not necessarily that they're not interesting, but we had to prioritize what we could achieve this year. And these are shown in the green ovals and shapes. A lot of areas there that we need to follow up on future phases. There is a VMS, a copper belt that trends along the northern part of the Muus property. This has been explored in the past by Kaminko, and not something that we've spent a lot of time on this year, but we find it to be quite interesting. So let's hit the Fancamp property. As I mentioned earlier, we acquired that from O3 Mining earlier this year, and we picked up this in addition to their Embry property, which is a little bit further to the north. It was discovered by Teck in the 1950s, and they discovered basically a 2-kilometer long zone of silicification, carbonate alteration, and quartz tourmaline carbonate veining. So Teck and various companies that came after them ended up drilling about 105 historical drill holes. These were all very low diameter, narrow diameter, and to very shallow depths. Almost all of the holes are less than 100 meters vertical. What attracted us to this area were some of these grades that they were coming up with. 2 meters of 10 grams, 0.9 meters of 20 grams, 3 meters of 12 grams, and 6 meters of 8 grams at the A zone, and at very, very shallow depths, 6, 10, 12, 11 meter shallow depths. Very similar results at the B zone, and there's also some interesting results that were coming out of the D and E zones. So within that trend, there's 2 to 6 subparallel veins, and these are each separated by about 15 to 30 meters. These veins are maybe less than a meter to upwards of 5 or 6 meters wide. Our analysis of the data showed that there are plunging chutes at both the A and the B zone that are in the early stages of definition just because of the shallow nature of the historical drilling. So what we wanted to achieve was to establish continuity on some of these historical veins and also prove up the fact that these plunging chutes are real. So we designed a 14 drill hole program that would test the A and the B zone and a little bit in the D zone. And I'll show you the next slide here. So this slide here zeroes in on the A, B, and D zone. This dark shaded area along here and the dashed lines is what we call the corridor of veins. This is that corridor that hosts anywhere between 2 and 6 subparallel veins. On the hanging wall, or the west side of that, there's a very large continuous IP chargeability anomaly. And there's a very strong spatial relationship with the mineralization, the gold mineralization, and the IP anomaly. However, the mineralization does not exactly overlie it. There's also a large magnetic anomaly that occurs on this side of the gold zone, which is not shown on this map. And we're also doing a lot of investigation to establish, the relationship between the magnetics, the IP, and the gold mineralization. So during our field program during 2020, we also did a series of surface trenches. And I'm just going to show you. These are all shown in green here. We focused on the area between the A and B zones, as well as the B zone, but also we wanted to get an idea of what's going on along this IP anomaly. So several of the trenches are off of the vein trend, looking at either interpreted subparallel vein structures or the IP anomaly itself. So this next slide shows some of the trenching results that we released a month or so ago. On the area between the A and the B zone, we were quite excited to find some anomalous values that were coming out in an area that was not historically known to host mineralization. So we did have some not super high grade, but some decent widths of just under a gram and some pretty interesting grab sample results as well. The vast majority of our work focused at what we call Trench 1 at the B zone, and I have a blow-up map of that coming up on the next slide. Interestingly, up here on Trench 3, we uncovered 2 brand new subparallel zones. Once again, not super high grade, but indicative that the structures are continuing up in that direction. And so that deserves a bit more work to follow up on that. And then way up at the D zone, the first time, there was some historical drilling done there, but we were able to uncover on surface for the first time the mineralization in that area, an anomalous interval of 1.1 grams over just under 2 meters. So this map here zooms in on the Fancamp B zone, Trench 1. We did get some really exciting results coming out of this. We expanded trenching that was done in the past significantly. So a lot of these areas to the west and south are brand new. Some really neat results here, 7.6 grams over a meter, 10.98 grams over a meter, and several more sort of in that range. On the western extension zone, some interesting anomalous results, 1.26 grams or over half a meter, 1.4 grams over 3 meters. And interestingly here in the middle, these are also some very interesting high-grade results, 1.7 meters of 5.6 grams, 3 meters of 12 grams, and 0.8 meters of 5 grams. So I think once we finish all of our interpretations, we'll see some good continuity established along this main vein here in the central bit. Hole number 1 and 2 were drilled below this trench. Hole number 1 did get some interesting anomalies, as high as 1 gram over half a meter. And hole number 2 did get one pretty nice interval of 4.7 grams across a meter. And that would be along the eastern edge of this trench. So we're just working on interpretations now. We should be able to release more results coming up here fairly soon. Once again, the labs are very, very slow these days. There's a lot of people looking for their assay results, and we're not the only company in this situation right now. So our next target areas, as I mentioned earlier, target area 2, we're back on the Muus property, and this is that long trend where the Gerscherville deformation zone extends east from the Nelligan deposit. I'll just highlight a little. Nelligan is a very different style of mineralization in this part of the Abitibi. It's low grade, but very, very large, and it's sediment hosted. So although there are veins and silicification in the mineralization there, it's not like a distinct vein. It's more disseminated throughout sediments. Now, interestingly, that package of alteration and sediments extends northwest onto our property up through here and through here. Now, all of these dots shown here, these are historical till samples that were drilled by ESSO back in the 80s. And these are effectively soil samples. They're testing the interface between the till and the bedrock. And they take concentrate samples at that point and count gold grains. So there's a real interesting cluster of gold grades right along the Gerscherville, right at that contact, and another cluster down here. So these were key areas that we wanted to target on. And these are the 2 areas that we're putting we put an IP grid over here, and there was some existing IP information here that we were able to extract and use. But we'll be drilling some drill holes along here and down here, and also up in target area 3, which is another intriguing area, as the Monster Lake Fancamp trend and the Philibert Joe Man trend come quite close together. There's a lot of structural complexities and interesting areas, traps potentially for gold mineralization in that area. So as I mentioned, we've started we've mobilized a rig to the area. We'll be drilling about 1,200 meters spread between these 3 areas, right here, and up at target area 3. We expect to have this drilling completed over the next a month, and drill results probably, I would expect them maybe early in the new year. Things are coming back pretty slow. So I'm going to pass back to Oren here, and he's going to talk a little bit about some comparables for us.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. So just before we wrap things up, wanted to put together a little slide for you to highlight our valuation and the opportunity that you have. So we've included a couple of other companies who are active in the region. We show Doré Copper, which has the Corner Bay, the Cedar Bay, and Joe Man deposits. Northern Superior, who has the Lac Surprise project, and then Vanstar, who has a 25% interest of the 3.2 million ounce Nelligan project. And as we advance our Muus project, we would hope to see a re-rating of our stock towards the valuations that we're seeing from some of our peers.
Thanks. So real quickly, we have a really strong management team. Headed, our executive chairman and director is Chad Williams. He's the founder of Blue Thunder. Myself, of course, I'm a geologist by background, over 30 years in the industry. Oren, our CFO, and on the board we have a great mix of technical backgrounds, financial, corporate development. So it's really a tremendous team to work with. So real quick summary here, why Blue Thunder? Well, we have the largest land position in an emerging gold district. We're underlain by some really exciting underexplored ground. We're on strike with some exciting new gold discoveries made by some of our surrounding companies. We're fully funded for our initial trenching and drill program. We tested a high-grade gold target. Results are still coming out, and we've just started a new drill program at our Muus block. And as I mentioned, we have a great team, good mix of technical, financial, and strategic experience. So that really wraps up our presentation. There's a few additional maps in the appendix that you're welcome to look through, some geophysics and a few other slides. It'll be interesting. So,
great, thank you, Rob and Oren. Start off with a couple of questions for you. One of the things you touched on, of course, is the lack of outcrop in the area. I was wondering if you could tell some of our participants about how you go about exploring such a large amount of area with such a small amount of rock to look at. What kinds of things do you rely on to come up with targets?
Yeah, that's a great question. In a nutshell, we have to rely on information that gives us that third dimension, and that would include geophysics, that would include any historical drill information, but we also incorporate any surface geological maps, and the geologists are pretty good at inferring what might be below the ground. We also want to use more soil geochemistry. Some of the new techniques like MMI are really good at reading a little bit further at depth. So there's a lot of tools that we can use, and I'm all about layering information. I like to see 1, 2, 3 bits of information that are all pointing to one particular area as being a target, and then I'll be excited to move on to that. So in summary, it's geophysics, soil sample soil sampling and drilling and understanding the geological environment that we're in and what the potential is.
And about how much cover do you normally see on these properties?
In the Abitibi, I mean, anyone who's traveled up there, you know what it looks like. There's a lot of lakes, there's a lot of forest, there's a lot of swampy areas. So it's pretty typical where we are. I know along some of these deformation zones, there seems to be a little bit more cover just because the ground has weathered a little bit lower. It's more altered, and when the glaciers came in, they scoured it out. So that's an area where overburden filled up. But in general, from my experience, this is pretty typical of anywhere within the Abitibi or the Shield in general.
Okay. A question from one of our participants here asking, generally, what depth are your target zones, and what are the depths and cost of your drill holes? You know, even if you can tell us approximately.
Yeah. So we're, you know, the historical drilling at Fancamp was really, really shallow. I mean, some of these were just below surface, and you know, that's great as a starting point. At the same time, we don't want to go down hundreds and hundreds of meters. We like to sort of start where it's known and go a bit below that. So we're starting, you know, maybe 50, 60, 70 meters below surface and starting to move down from there. We'll be putting together a detailed interpretation and cross sections eventually of all of our drill holes, and it'll be clear where we've drilled. Just going on drilling costs, I think we've actually had a very good situation with our drilling company. You know, it's able to maintain a less than $100 a meter all in, which I believe to be a very attractive drilling cost.
That's about as good as it gets, unless you're in Timmins or something next to a highway.
Yeah, no, it's tremendous.
So unfortunately, the other side of that is that the labs in Quebec are overwhelmed for the most part, and part of that I think was that since everything was shut down for a while, there was a mad rush when everybody could go back and get out and start drilling again. So it's a little bit of a artificial, and it's not something that we've seen at Red Cloud that's everywhere. You talk to people in Nevada, for example, and some of them are getting great turnaround. Of course, in BC right now, things are really, really slow because you have all the people who try and do their exploration in the Triangle, which is a very short season, and then everything's slammed into the lab. So it's happened to certainly in Western Canada and Quebec. It's a very, very common thing.
Yeah.
Another question. So you mentioned, of course, you know, with 51,000 hectares, you haven't really gotten to all of the ground per se. I mean, could you give us an idea of how much of the ground has been prospected or soil sampled, and how much more you'd like to get done, say maybe in the next non-winter field season?
Yeah. I mean, as far as putting a percentage on the ground, it's tough. Bear in mind that a large percentage of that 51,000 hectares is tied up by the Nisk property and the Muus East property, and they've seen really very little exploration. The Muus block itself is probably, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20,000. Yeah, I'd have to, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but maybe 20,000 hectares or something like that. Of that, there have been varying amounts of exploration over maybe a third of that at most. Some of these are very old. They go back to the 1950s. Some of them more recent in the 90s and early 2000s. Some of it's quality work. Some of it's old work that you can't really incorporate. So we've been working hard to bring all of that into a usable format, into a digital format. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like I mentioned, that we did find some good geophysical work on one of our grid areas that we want to drill on, that we were able to find the digital data, reprocess it, and come up with some interesting drill targets. So next year, we certainly will be hitting the ground again. We might try to do some work in the winter when the lakes and ponds are frozen. You can walk over them and do geophysics and things like that, and get ready for an active field season coming up. Probably about May, June is about the time when the snow's gone and we can put boots on the ground again.
Great. One of the things people always want to know in an area that they're not that familiar with is what kind of access you have. And I know that's something that you don't have too much description of, and maybe some of our listeners would appreciate hearing, how you access the property and how it is getting around out there.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there is a network of forestry roads, throughout there. They're not all perfectly well maintained. Some of the main ones are, and they're open roads. You're allowed to use them. And then there's little side trails. Some of these are a little bit overgrown, so occasionally we have to bring a crew in and clean out the old roads so that we have proper access. And also, there's certain areas where you have a canoe or an outboard motorboat, and you can access the lake shores and then get to an area that way. So it's probably it's pretty easy to get almost anywhere. Some places might be a little bit more challenging in terms of cleaning out some old roads, but there is a network of trails and roads pretty well everywhere.
But you're not dependent on aircraft at all?
No, we're not doing any helicopter support or fly in, fly out. Every part of the property you can get to, it might take a few hours of driving around, but you can get to every part of the property.
Great. That wraps up our questions that we had from participants and myself, and just like to thank everybody for participating, and thank Rob and Oren for presenting for us today. And I'll just highlight that Red Cloud's next webinar is actually tomorrow, and that's going to be with Sun Summit Minerals, which was formerly called San Marco Resources, and that's at 2 p.m. Will be hosted by my colleague Derek McPherson, and include the CEO Bob Willis and VP Technical Services Sharon Alexander. So once again, thank you to everybody for participating, and stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Jacob, and thanks everyone for listening in.
Thank you.